The cabin held its breath long after the soldiers' hoofbeats faded into the dripping forest. The fire had burned low, and only faint embers glowed, but the air was hot with the memory of danger. The woman leaned against the table, her palms flat on the rough wood, her shoulders trembling from the weight of what had just passed. She had stood against the law, against men who carried authority, rifles, and gallows rope. One wrong word, and she'd have been dragged from her own cabin. Her life ended on the nearest tree branch. Yet she had done it, not because she owed these men anything, not because she had planned it, but because something inside her could not betray them. Dakota broke the silence first. "You are braver than most men I've known," he said, his voice warm with admiration. His grin spread easily, though his eyes carried genuine respect. "You carry a warrior's spirit." The woman's lips pressed tight, as though refusing his praise, but her hands still trembled as she reached for her rifle to set it back on its rack. Chenoa stood apart, his eyes fixed on her, steady and unreadable. Yet beneath that stillness something had shifted in him. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. Something he had not expected, something he could not name. The storm had bound their fates, but dawn carried decisions none of them could avoid. Midday, the skies had cleared, leaving the forest washed clean, the earth soft beneath the horses' hooves. The Apache brothers prepared to leave, knowing the soldiers would continue to sweep the area. The longer they remained, the greater the risk, to themselves and to her. Dakota saddled his horse with swift hands, his movements restless, torn between caution and desire. "Brother," he said, turning to Chenoa, "we cannot linger. But why not bring her with us? She cannot survive here alone forever. With us she would have protection." The woman stiffened at his words, her hands freezing where she had been gathering blankets to pack. "Leave my home?" she asked sharply. "This is all I have. I won't abandon it." Dakota's face fell, but his fire did not fade. "Your strength deserves more than loneliness. My people, our people, would honor a woman like you." Chenoa's voice cut in, hard and steady. "Enough." His gaze fixed on Dakota, sharp with warning. "She is not ours to claim." Dakota's jaw tightened. "And what would you have her do? Wait here for soldiers to return? For thieves to take what they please? She stood for us, Chenoa. Should we not stand for her?" The elder brother said nothing, but the storm in his eyes spoke louder than words. The woman turned away, her chest tight, her mind spinning. She did not need them to fight over her fate. She had survived long before they came, and she would survive long after. Yet, a part of her, a part she tried to silence, longed for something more than survival. Longed for the fire of Dakota's laughter, the weight of Chenoa's steady gaze, the warmth of a presence in her silent cabin. But choices were cruel, and the world was not kind to those who dreamed beyond survival. When the moment of departure came, it was Chenoa who decided. He mounted his horse with deliberate calm, his face as unreadable as the stone cliffs of his homeland. "We cannot both stay," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "Two Apaches here will draw death to this place." Dakota frowned, confusion flickering across his features. "Then we go together." Chenoa turned his gaze on his brother, steady and firm. "No, you will go. I will stay." Dakota's eyes widened. "Stay? With her?" He looked between them, the fire in him clashing with disbelief. "Brother, you—" Chenoa cut him off. "You are the wind, Dakota. You cannot be tied to one place. You must ride, survive, carry our blood forward. His voice faltered for a fraction, then steadied. "I will remain. My fight has carried me far enough." Dakota stared at him, the fire in his eyes dimming, replaced by a heavy sorrow. He wanted to argue, to fight the decision, but deep down he knew. His brother's path had always been different from his own. At last, Dakota dismounted and clasped Chenoa's arm in a warrior's grip. "Then I ride for us both," he said quietly. "Do not let your heart turn to stone, brother." Their eyes locked, a lifetime of brotherhood spoken in a single look. Then Dakota swung onto his horse, casting one last glance at the woman. His smile was bittersweet, tinged with loss and acceptance. "Take care of him," he said softly. And then he was gone, the forest swallowing him as hoofbeats faded into the distance. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with things unsaid. The woman stood on the porch watching Chenoa as he dismounted and led his horse to the small lean-to by the cabin. His movements were steady, as though nothing monumental had just been decided. But when he finally turned to her, his eyes held a weight that words could not carry. "You risked your life for us," he said, his voice low. "I will not forget." She met his gaze, her own voice trembling. "Why stay? You could have gone with him." His silence stretched, the forest alive with birdsong and dripping branches. At last he spoke. "Because I found something here I did not expect, something I did not know I needed." Her breath caught, her chest tight. She searched his eyes for deceit, for fleeting fancy, but found only truth, steady and unyielding. She looked away quickly, her hands gripping the railing. "I am no prize, Chenoa. I'm just a woman with a cabin and ghosts for company." He stepped closer, his presence heavy yet grounding. "And I am no prize either. I am hunted, scarred, filled with battles I cannot forget, but together," his voice softened, a rare vulnerability slipping through. "Together perhaps we can find shelter." Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time in years, she felt something crack within her, something she had sealed away after burying her husband. Hope. The days that followed were quiet, yet not empty. Chenoa repaired the cabin roof where the storm had torn shingles loose, chopped wood with strong, steady strokes, and tended the horses with patient care. The woman continued her routines, but now there was another set of footsteps on the porch, another hand at the fire, another heartbeat in the silence. They spoke little at first, words unnecessary when presence was enough. Yet when they did speak, their voices carried truths rarely shared. She told him of the nights she had wept into the silence, of the days she had cursed the earth for taking her husband. He told her of battles fought, of friends buried, of a world that had tried to cage him. And slowly, the walls around their hearts began to crumble. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, painting the forest in fire, she stood beside him on the porch. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. For a long time they said nothing. At last, she whispered, "When the soldiers return, and they will, you'll be in danger again." Chenoa's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "So will you." Her hand brushed his, tentative, fragile. "Then we face it together." He turned his hand, clasping hers with quiet certainty. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers, and in them she saw not only strength but something deeper, something that had been forged in storms and battles, yet softened here, in the quiet of her cabin. And in that moment, they understood. Love was not a thing of grand declarations or perfect circumstances. It was survival made gentler, loneliness made lighter, wounds made bearable. They had not sought it, they had not wanted it, yet in the ashes of storms and the shadow of soldiers, they had found it. The storm passed with the gray light of dawn, leaving the forest dripping and hushed. Mist clung to the pines and the earth was soft beneath the weight of the rain. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, its warmth fading into the cool of morning. The woman stirred first, her body stiff from sleeping in her chair. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the soft light that crept through the cracks in the shutters. For a moment, she almost forgot the strangers in her home. But then her gaze fell on them. Dakota sprawled comfortably on a blanket near the hearth, his breathing slow and even, and Chenoa still seated upright, his eyes sharp even in half shadow. He had not slept. "You'll burn yourself out," she said softly, almost without thinking. Chenoa's gaze shifted to her, unreadable as ever. Wolves do not sleep when the forest is restless. Her brows furrowed, but before she could ask what he meant, the answer came. A sound faint at first, but growing clearer with each passing breath. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Her blood ran cold. Soldiers. Chenoa rose instantly, silent and fluid, every sense sharpening. Dakota woke at once, stirred by instinct. "What is it?" he asked, still half in dreams. "Cavalry," Chenoa said. "They followed our trail." The woman's heart pounded. She rushed to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see the glint of sunlight on rifles and the flash of blue coats among the trees. A patrol, no fewer than 10 men, their horses slick from the storm. They moved with purpose, their eyes sweeping the land. "They'll come here," she whispered, panic edging her voice. "They'll search every homestead. If they find you, they will find us," Chenoa interrupted, his tone grim but steady. "It is only a matter of how we meet them." Dakota's jaw clenched, his fire rising. "We fight." Chenoa shook his head. "We cannot fight 10 men with 2 blades." The woman turned, her face pale. "If they find you here, they'll hang me for harboring you. They won't care if I open the door by choice or at gunpoint. I'll be marked a traitor." The weight of her words settled heavy. Chenoa met her gaze, and for the first time his eyes carried something like regret. "Then we will leave, now." But it was too late. The hoofbeats drew nearer, the creak of saddles and the murmur of voices carried on the damp air. The soldiers were fanning out, circling the cabin like hounds. The woman's hands trembled as she reached for her rifle. "If they think I've helped you, they'll kill me anyway. The only chance is to hide you." Chenoa frowned. "Hide?" "There's a root cellar beneath the floorboards," she said quickly. "It's small, but it will keep you out of sight while they search." Dakota grinned, relieved. "Then we hide and live to fight another day." But Chenoa's face remained carved from stone. He did not trust hiding, did not trust fate to hold soldiers' eyes away. Yet the woman's fear was real, her life hanging in the balance as much as theirs. "Go," she urged, her voice sharp with urgency, "before they see you through the window." At last, Chenoa gave a short nod. The brothers moved quickly as she pulled aside the rug in the center of the cabin, revealing a wooden trapdoor. With a groan of old hinges, she lifted it open. The cellar below was dark, lined with jars and shelves, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Dakota dropped down first, his movements quick and light. Chenoa followed, though not without hesitation, his eyes lingering on the woman as though memorizing her face. Then the trapdoor shut, and the rug was tugged back into place just as a heavy knock shook the cabin door. The woman's breath hitched. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders and gripped her rifle before opening the door. On the porch stood a sergeant, his mustache dripping from the damp morning air, flanked by 2 armed soldiers. Behind them, more men patrolled the clearing, their eyes sharp. "Ma'am," the sergeant said curtly, tipping his hat but not his suspicion. "We're tracking 2 Apache renegades. They were seen near this forest last night. Have you had any visitors?" Her pulse raced, but she forced her voice steady. "Only the storm," she said flatly. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look inside?" She gripped the rifle tighter, though she knew it would mean nothing against 10 men. "This is my home. I don't welcome uninvited guests." The sergeant's jaw set. "With respect, ma'am, harboring Apaches is punishable by hanging. If you've nothing to hide, you'll have no reason to refuse us." Her heart thundered. The cellar trapdoor seemed to scream beneath the rug. She thought of Chenoa's warning eyes, of Dakota's boyish grin, of the weight of their lives pressed into the earth beneath her feet. And then she made her choice. Stepping aside, she opened the door wider. "Search, then. You'll find nothing but a widow's life and 4 walls to hold it." The soldiers entered, their boots thudding against the floorboards, their eyes sweeping every corner. The sergeant trailed behind, sharp as a hawk. One soldier poked at the shelves, another peered beneath the bed, another tested the door to the small back room. All the while the woman stood still, rifle in hand, her face carved into a mask of indifference. But inside, every breath was fire, every heartbeat a prayer. Then came the moment she feared. One soldier stepped onto the rug. His boot scuffed against the uneven floorboard where the trapdoor lay hidden. He paused, frowning, and bent down. Her throat closed. "Something wrong?" the sergeant asked. The soldier rapped his knuckles against the board. A hollow sound answered. His eyes lit with suspicion. "There's space beneath." The sergeant's gaze snapped to the woman, his hand drifting to the pistol at his side. "Care to explain, ma'am?" For a single heartbeat, the cabin froze. Then she acted. "That's my root cellar," she said sharply, stepping forward. "Where else would I keep food through winter?" She shifted her rifle deliberately, the barrel rising just enough to remind them that this was her home. "You want to smash open a widow's cellar for a jar of beans, go ahead, but don't expect me to rebuild it for you after." The soldier hesitated, looking to his sergeant. The sergeant studied her, suspicion still burning in his eyes, but something in her stance gave him pause. She was not pleading. She was not trembling. She was daring him. After a long moment, he spat to the side. "Leave it. She's right. Nothing but beans down there." The soldier muttered, dissatisfied, but stepped away. The search ended as quickly as it had begun, the soldiers filing out into the clearing once more. The sergeant lingered at the door. "If you see them," he said, "you'd best tell us. Men like that don't belong in these woods. They'll only bring you trouble." She met his gaze, her voice firm. "I've lived with trouble longer than you've worn that uniform. I'll manage." His lips tightened, but he said no more. With the tip of his hat, he left, and the patrol rode off into the dripping mist, their hoofbeats fading into the forest. The moment the last echo vanished, the woman dropped to her knees, pulling back the rug. She lifted the trap door, and two pairs of eyes stared back from the darkness, one burning with restrained fire, the other sharp as a blade. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice trembling with the release of fear. Dakota climbed out first, grinning wide. "You faced them like a warrior, woman of the cabin. They believed every word." Chenoa followed, slower, his gaze fixed on her. "You risked your life," he said, his voice low, heavy with meaning. "For us." Her chest heaved, her hands still shaking from the encounter. "I couldn't let them take you. Not after." She stopped, unable to name what had changed in the night, unable to name why she had chosen their lives over her own safety. Dakota clapped his brother on the shoulder, his grin bright. "Do you see, Chenoa? Not all settlers are our enemies. Fate brought us here." Chenoa said nothing, but his eyes never left the woman. He saw the tremble in her hands, the steel in her voice, the fire that had burned in her eyes when she stood against the sergeant. And in that moment, he understood something undeniable. They were no longer just two warriors seeking shelter. The storm had bound them to this woman in a way no soldier's threat could sever. The storm lingered long into the night, relentless and wild. Rain hammered the cabin roof in steady sheets, and the wind rattled the shutters as though trying to pry its way inside. Yet within those four walls, the air was warm, thick with wood smoke, the scent of stew, and the unspoken weight of three souls forced together by circumstance. Dakota, ever restless, had loosened into comfort more easily than his elder brother. He leaned back in his chair, one boot crossed over the other, his smile small but present as he studied their hostess. There was admiration in his gaze, not lustful, but intrigued. The woman, hardened though she appeared, carried strength in her posture and sorrow in her eyes. To Dakota, that sorrow looked familiar, like an echo of his own. Chenoa noticed it too, though his reaction was different. Where Dakota softened, Chenoa stiffened. He had seen this look in his brother before, that curious tilt of the head, that light in his eyes. It was the look of a man whose heart reached out before his mind could hold it back. And Chenoa knew better than most. Affection could be dangerous, especially across the line that divided their people from settlers. As the fire popped, Dakota's voice broke the silence. "You have a strong home," he said to the woman. "It does not look like much from the outside, but inside it feels like the earth's heart. Warm, steady." Her lips pressed together, her eyes flicking toward him in a mix of caution and something softer she tried to hide. "This cabin is no heart," she replied. "It's just wood and nails. Nothing more." Dakota leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "It is more. A home built by your own hands carries your spirit in its walls. That is strength worth more than any rifle." Her breath caught, just faintly, but enough for Chenoa to notice. He shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. "Enough, Dakota," he said sharply in their own tongue, a low growl meant for his brother's ears alone. Dakota glanced at him, eyes narrowing slightly. He understood well enough what Chenoa meant. Do not grow attached. Do not let your tongue run loose. But Dakota, ever the flame to Chenoa's stone, only smiled faintly and switched back to English. "Forgive my brother," he said to the woman. "He trusts little and speaks less." Her gaze drifted to Chenoa, who met it steadily, unflinching. Something in that look unsettled her, not because it frightened her, but because it seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. She looked away quickly, back toward the fire. The tension between the brothers thickened as the night deepened. Chenoa's silence was heavy, guarded, while Dakota's words danced like sparks, too eager, too curious. It was not that they opposed each other openly, but the air between them carried an old rhythm, the elder pulling back, the younger pushing forward. Later, when the stew had cooled and Dakota's humming faded into quiet, the cabin settled into uneasy stillness. The woman tended to the fire, stirring the embers, her face lit by the glow. Dakota leaned drowsily against the table, half asleep, but Chenoa remained as sharp as the blade he had left outside. His eyes followed the woman as she moved, measuring, not just her steps, but the heaviness in them. She felt his gaze, though she did not speak of it. Instead, she set aside the iron poker and sat down, her shawl drawn close around her. For a long while, neither said a word. The only sound was the storm beyond, and the faint, steady breathing of Dakota, who had surrendered to sleep at last. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before, stripped of the edge she wore like armor. "You watch me as though I were an enemy." Chenoa's reply came low and steady. "I watch everything." She met his eyes, her own tired but unflinching. "And what do you see?" He did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered, dark and searching, as if weighing whether truth was worth the risk. At last he spoke. "I see a woman who has lost much but still stands. A woman who does not bend, even when the wind would break her." Her throat tightened. It had been years since anyone had spoken words that cut so close to her hidden self. She swallowed, her fingers tightening on the fabric of her shawl. "And I see two men who should not be here. Soldiers hunt you. If they come to my door—" She stopped herself, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "They will kill me for helping you." Chenoa inclined his head. "Yes, and still you opened your door." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked away to the fire, watching the flames shift and curl. For a long time, neither spoke again, but something had shifted. An understanding, fragile and unspoken, settling between them like the hush before dawn. As the night stretched on, the storm began to soften. Rain slowed from a downpour to a steady patter, and the wind, though still, fierce, no longer screamed against the cabin walls. Dakota stirred in his sleep, murmuring something in Apache before turning onto his side, lost in dreams. The woman sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Shoritiui fought to hide. Chenoa studied her, not as a predator studies prey, but as a soldier studies the horizon, searching for signs of what lies ahead. "You have no family," he said finally, though it was more statement than question. Her eyes flicked toward him, then back to the fire. "None left." "Your husband?" She hesitated, then answered, her voice low. "Buried in the earth behind this cabin. Fever took him." Chenoa's gaze softened, barely, but enough to dim the sharpness in his eyes. "And yet you stay." "This is all I have," she whispered. "If I leave, I lose even his memory. Out there," she gestured toward the storm-lashed wilderness, "there is nothing but emptiness." For the first time, Chenoa allowed silence to hold weight without resistance. He understood. Loss was not unfamiliar to him. His people had buried more than just kin. They had buried their way of life, their freedom, their land beneath the boots of soldiers. The ache she carried was not unlike his own, though their worlds stood on opposite sides. After a long pause, she glanced at him again, her voice softer now. "And you, why do they hunt you?" Chenoa's jaw tightened. His instinct was to hold the truth, to guard it like fire from the wind, but her eyes, steady, searching, unafraid, drew it from him. "Because I will not kneel," he said, simply. "Because my people are told to live in cages, and I will not live like a caged wolf." Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, and in that gaze was a strange recognition. Two souls scarred by different battles, yet shaped by the same fire of survival. The moment lingered, fragile, dangerous. She looked away first, pulling her shawl, tighter as if to shield herself from the weight of it. But Chenoa did not look away. For all his caution, all his guarded strength, something inside him had stirred. Something he had not sought nor wanted, but now could not ignore. By the time dawn began to edge the storm's darkness, the cabin was quiet. Dakota slept soundly, his dreams untouched by the heaviness in the air. The woman rested in her chair, eyes closed though not truly asleep, her face softened by weariness. And Chenoa, the man of stone, sat awake by the dying embers of the fire. His knife hand twitched out of habit, but his thoughts were far from the blade. They lingered instead on the woman across the room, and on the strange truth he could not escape. He had come seeking only shelter. Yet in the storm's shadow, he had found something he did not know he needed, something he had long since stopped believing he could feel. The fire cast a soft glow across the cabin walls, shadows dancing in rhythm with the crackle of the flames. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, the storm outside clawing at the world with wild fury. But within the cabin, there was a tense stillness. The woman stood with her rifle still at hand, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Her home had been built with her own blood and sweat, or rather with hers and her late husband's. She had buried him just beyond the trees after a fever claimed him 2 winters past. Since then, she had survived on her own, chopping wood, trapping rabbits, tending a small patch of earth when the season allowed. Loneliness had become her silent companion, but it was a safer one than any stranger at her door. She had long ago learned that men, soldiers, drifters, even fellow settlers, saw a lone woman's cabin as an invitation. Some came with smooth words, others with rough hands, and most left trouble in their wake. She had grown a hard skin, a sharper tongue, and a will that would not bend easily. Now, staring at the 2 Apache men dripping rain onto her floor, she felt every instinct scream at her to drive them out. And yet, something stayed her hand. They did not look at her the way other men had. There was hunger in their eyes, yes, but it was not for her. It was for food, warmth, survival. The younger one, Dakota, carried an energy about him, like fire, flickering even in weariness. He smiled faintly as he rubbed his hands by the fire, a small, disarming smile that seemed almost out of place for a fugitive. The older Chenoa was stone, silent, watchful, his eyes tracking her every move with the wariness of a wolf in enemy territory. The woman finally broke the silence. "You'll sit there," she said, pointing with the barrel of her rifle toward a pair of chairs near the hearth. "You'll eat, you'll warm yourselves, and when the storm passes, you'll go." Dakota inclined his head in thanks, his dark eyes glimmering in the firelight. "That is more kindness than most give us," he said softly. Chenoa said nothing. He lowered himself into a chair with the steady grace of a man who trusted no ground, no roof, no human soul to hold him safe. The woman set the rifle against the wall, though within easy reach. Then she moved to the hearth, lifting the lid off the iron pot hanging over the flames. The smell of venison stew filled the cabin, rich and earthy. She ladled portions into 2 wooden bowls and placed them on the table with rough bread beside. Dakota's gratitude shone openly as he accepted the bowl, inhaling deeply before taking a slow bite. The warmth of the stew spread through him, and for a moment his shoulders lost their tension. Chenoa, however, ate in silence, his eyes flicking between his brother, the woman, and the door, always measuring, always prepared. "You live alone?" Chenoa finally said, his voice gravel deep though not unkind. The woman stiffened at his observation. "What's it to you?" "Dangerous," Chenoa replied simply. "Soldiers, thieves, hungry men. A cabin alone in the wilderness draws them like wolves to blood." She shot him a hard look, her jaw tightening. "I've managed well enough." Dakota glanced between them, sensing the spark of tension. "My brother does not mean insult," he said gently. "He speaks only what is true. The world is not gentle to those who walk it alone." The woman returned to her own chair, pulling a shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes softened for only a heartbeat before she masked them again. "The world has never been gentle to me," she said quietly. Silence followed, heavy but not empty. The fire popped, and rain lashed the window, filling the space between their breaths. As the hours passed, the storm showed no sign of breaking. Thunder shook the earth, and the wind howled as though the forest itself were in pain. Yet inside, the cabin held its warmth, and the 3 souls within its walls began to shift in their stances. Dakota, quick to break silence, began to speak, not of war or soldiers but of the land. He spoke of rivers that glimmered like silver under the moon, of the mountains where the eagles nested, of nights where the stars shone like 1,000 fires in the sky. His words painted the wilderness in strokes of beauty and life rather than hardship. The woman listened in spite of herself. His voice carried the kind of reverence she had only ever heard from men of faith, yet his church was the earth, his hymns the songs of wind and water. She felt something stir within her chest, a reminder that the world beyond her cabin was more than storms and solitude. Chenoa, however, remained reserved. When he spoke, it was to caution Dakota, to remind him that words could reveal too much. Yet even in his silence, the woman sensed something, an iron loyalty, a protective weight in his presence that was both intimidating and strangely grounding. At one point, Dakota leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "You must be strong," he said to the woman, "to build this place, to keep it, to face the nights alone." Her lips pressed together, and for once, she did not deflect the compliment. "Strength is not a choice," she murmured. "It's survival." Her gaze lingered on the younger Apache, then shifted toward the elder. For a fleeting instant, her eyes softened as they met Chenoa's. His face remained unreadable, but something flickered behind his stern expression, a recognition perhaps of her truth. The tension between them was no longer simply mistrust. It had grown into something more complex, more fragile. It was the kind of tension that could fracture into conflict or evolve into connection. The woman leaned back, clutching her shawl as if it were armor. She had told herself long ago that she needed no one. Yet as she sat across from 2 strangers who were supposed to be enemies, she realized that for the first time in years, the silence in her cabin did not feel like loneliness. By the time the fire had burned low and the storm had reached its darkest hour, the 3 sat in a fragile truce. The woman's rifle rested against the wall, untouched. Dakota had drifted into quiet humming, an Apache tune low and soothing. Chenoa still watched, ever vigilant, yet the edges of his gaze seemed less sharp than before. The storm had forced them together, but something deeper was beginning to take root. For within that cabin, mistrust wrestled with necessity, fear mingled with curiosity, and 3 lives, so different, so scarred, had begun to weave into one another's story. And though none of them would admit it aloud, each felt it. This meeting was not chance. It was the beginning of something none had expected, something the storm had not destroyed but delivered. The sun was sinking low over the wide Arizona sky, painting the mesas in blood-red streaks. Two Apache riders moved across the harsh desert, their horses weary, their bodies hardened by days of relentless travel. They were not just wanderers. They were men chased by the heavy hand of the U.S. cavalry. To the soldiers, they were fugitives, renegades who refused to surrender their spirit to the white man's law. To themselves, they were simply brothers of the earth, warriors seeking a place where their lungs could breathe freely again. Chenoa, the older of the two, carried the weight of wisdom in his silence. His face, carved by wind and battle, spoke more than his tongue ever did. He was cautious, sharp-eyed, and wary of anything that seemed too easy. By his side rode Dakota, younger and restless, his spirit more fire than stone. He carried laughter, still in his eyes when no one was looking, though hardship had carved its share of scars upon his heart. For days they had followed the dry riverbeds, hiding their tracks, stealing moments of rest only when the moon hid its face. But tonight was different. The sky above was brewing fury, a storm that promised more than rain. Dark clouds stretched like black wings across the horizon, and thunder grumbled in the distance. Out here, storms were merciless, and shelter was as precious as water. "Brother," Dakota muttered, urging his horse closer to Chenoa's side. "The sky chases us as hard as the soldiers do." Chenoa lifted his chin, scanning the distance. He said nothing, but his silence carried its meaning. They could not outpace the storm any more than they could outrun the endless cavalry patrols. Tonight, they needed walls, a roof, something stronger than a blanket of stars. As they pressed on, the desert gave way to a pocket of pines, their needles whispering in the rising wind. Dakota's sharp eyes caught a ribbon of smoke curling above the treetops, faint but steady. Smoke meant fire, fire meant people, and people could mean danger or safety. They exchanged a glance, no words needed. Both knew the risk. To walk into the home of settlers could mean a bullet before a greeting, but the storm rolling toward them left little choice. The horses, sensing the coming downpour, quickened their pace as if eager for any promise of shelter. The pines thinned, and there it was. A small cabin crouched against the slope of a hill, its logs weathered but sturdy. A thin wisp of smoke climbed from its chimney, proof that someone lived within. The windows glowed faintly, golden against the gray sky. Dakota exhaled, relief mingling with unease. A cabin. Perhaps fate does not hate us tonight? Chenoa's gaze hardened. Or perhaps it waits with teeth. Still, they guided their horses closer, the wind now howling like wolves at their heels. Rain spattered against their faces, cold and biting. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm was breaking loose in full force. Lightning split the heavens, thunder crashed like drums of war, and the downpour began in earnest, drenching both men to the bone. Chenoa dismounted first, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. He moved like a shadow, cautious, scanning for traps. Dakota followed, less fearful, more desperate for warmth. He strode to the cabin door and raised his fist to knock, but before he could, the door cracked open. A woman stood there. She was young, though hardship had stolen the bloom of girlhood from her face. Her hair was pulled back, strands escaping in the storm's gusts. Her eyes, gray as the sky above, narrowed with guarded suspicion at the sight of two Apache warriors on her threshold. In her hand she held a rifle, its barrel steady despite the tremble in her lips. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice brittle but strong. Dakota lifted his hands, palms open, showing he carried no weapon drawn. "Shelter," he said simply, his words thick with accent but clear enough. "The storm hunts us." Chenoa stepped forward, his eyes locked on the rifle. "We mean no harm," he added, though his tone carried no pleading, only truth, rough and cold as stone. The woman's gaze flicked between them, measuring, weighing. She had every reason to slam the door and leave them to the mercy of the rain. Out here, trust was a luxury, and the stories told of Apaches painted them as savage and merciless. Yet something in their eyes, perhaps the exhaustion, perhaps the honesty, softened her hand on the trigger. "You'll leave your weapons outside," she said firmly. "If you mean no harm, then prove it." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then Chenoa unfastened the knife at his belt, setting it on the porch. Dakota followed, laying down his hatchet beside it. The storm howled louder, as if impatient. Reluctantly, the woman opened the door wider. "Come in, but know this, one wrong move and I won't hesitate." The two warriors stepped inside. Warmth met them first, then the scent of wood smoke and stew simmering over the hearth. The cabin was small but sturdy, its walls lined with shelves of jars, blankets folded neatly on a wooden chest. It was the home of someone who had built a life with her own hands. Dakota breathed deep, savoring the heat, his shoulders loosening for the first time in days. Chenoa remained rigid, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as though the cabin itself might rise against him. The woman shut the door, shutting out the storm's roar. She kept the rifle close, her eyes never leaving her unexpected guests. For a long while, only the crackle of the fire and the storm's fury outside filled the silence. Finally, Dakota spoke, his voice softer now. "We thank you, woman of the cabin. Your fire saves us tonight." She said nothing, only watched them with wary eyes. But though her lips gave no reply, her hand shifted on the rifle, less rigid, less certain. And somewhere in that uncertain silence, a fragile thread of fate had been spun, binding the three beneath the storm's raging sky.